We're going to move back into the world of Alzheimer's, and I'm happy to introduce Eric DeJonge, who is the Director of Geriatrics at the MedStar Washington Hospital Center. And many of you know that program that I alluded to earlier as being one of the things that at MedStar is truly exceptional. This is the program, the care of the frail elder at home. Eric?
So I'm Eric DeJonge. I'm a geriatrician. I've been at the hospital center 16 years now. And I'm going to talk about a topic I've actually never talked about before. But I hope you will still think it was worthwhile. About memory loss, and really looking at not the biology so much as what, as far as we can tell, the patient and the family experience with different types of memory loss. I'm going to start with a picture, which actually was a little takeoff from Dr. Fedorov's picture, is this picture. And I want you to look at it for 10 seconds or so and tell me, we have microphones around the audience, tell me what are three things, you can pick one, but I want to get three things from the audience that are most striking or unusual about this picture. I need a volunteer. Over to the right, go ahead. So the tree is shaped like a human face, profile of a human face. Anything else about the picture? Two more things that are most striking or unusual, right here in the front. Looks like pieces of the brain are drifting away in the wind. Right, so the leaves are drifting away. They're green leaves, right? They're not leaves that are supposed to be falling off the tree, but the leaves are drifting away. And which way is the patient looking? Which way is the person looking? They're looking away from where the leaves are going. So they don't really know that the leaves are leaving. One more thing from the audience. What else is most striking about this? Right in the middle. The sun is rising? Yeah, the sun is rising. I actually, the tree looks healthy. It's a sunny day. You know, this isn't a picture of autumn or death or the end of life. It looks vibrant, right? But the person is losing part of their mind. All right, so think about, those are actually some of the themes that we're going to touch on during this talk. So these are my goals of the talk. I want to talk about what are kind of the types of human memory, and there's controversy over some of these categories, but I'm going to go through kind of the generally accepted types. What is the patient and family experience with some of those types of memory loss? And then in some ways, the most profound thing I want to talk about is what remains when memories are gone. So about 2,400 years ago, Aristotle was one of the first authors about memory. And he talked about when man or woman is born, they are born free of any knowledge, and they're kind of a blank slate. And as a person lives, they accumulate experiences, and they, at the end of their life, are the sum of their experiences. And that's his definition of personhood. Makes you wonder, if you lose memories of all your experiences, what does that mean for your personhood if your experiences are no longer with you? 2,000 years later, it took a while, but humans started to think about how our memories formed. And actually, David Hartley is one of the first. He thought that memories were kind of encoded in the brain and the nervous system in some way, not sure how. And then the first real kind of empirical scientist of memory was this guy named Ebbinghaus in the 1880s. Who used a lot of really interesting kind of experiments of flashing symbols and nonsensical syllables and other kind of visuals as well as oral things to kind of distinguish between three types of memory, which actually is categories that exist often to this day: sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. In the 1940s, this guy named Lashley, a cognitive kind of neuroscientist, said that these memories were actually distributed throughout the cortex of the brain. That there are traces that the memories leave in the brain in different places. And that kind of implies there can be backup systems. If memories are placed in, it's like if you want to hide your money, you hide it in a lot of different places so you don't lose it all at once. And there are memories kind of connected to different parts of the brain that you can retrieve even if one part of the brain is not working. Then in Miller, this is kind of the more rigorous kind of, categorization of short-term memory, which is a lot of what we think of as memory. Essentially, what can I remember that just happened? He found that there's a magic 7 digits or 7 words that human beings, can generally remember anywhere from 5 to 9. So plus or minus 2. If you're at the 5, you're a little bit, your memory is not quite as powerful. If you can remember 9 things, that's actually on the other end of the bell curve. And then you're going to have a couple quizzes in the course of this talk. So think about where you end up on that spectrum. And then finally, in 2001, there's kind of a summary article in General Psychology that negativity bias to human memory is kind of now pretty well documented, that humans the brain detects, retains, and recalls negative information faster than any other kinds of information. So I'm going to stop and ask you, why is that a good thing? Why is it good that we detect, retain, and kind of use negative memories fastest? Yeah, I'm sorry? Yeah, so it's an evolutionary benefit, right? As if you're a prey, you want to know who the predators are. You want to survive. So remember, if things are traumatic or dangerous, you want to kind of remember that. So negative information is a real negative bias is an evolutionary benefit. So all that kind of comes together in this slide. There's 4 general types of memory that then we can think of when we talk about memory loss, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Taking in new information, what we say here today and what I said in the last minute. Recognizing people and places. You've stored the people and the places, and you're kind of able to recall that. Remembering events of your life, both very short term, but also longer term, the kind of storage of memories. And then ability to use that to separate fact from fiction. And if all these things don't work, it's kind of at the right side of the table. You're not able to process immediate short-term information. You might not know who you are or who your family is or where you are. Generally in memory, you lose things in reverse, although there can be really patchy, especially with vascular or stroke-related dementias. You can lose certain types of memories in other ways, but Alzheimer's or degenerative memory loss tends to lose shorter-term things first and then longer-term. And finally, if you can't separate fact from fiction, a lot of folks with dementia confabulate, or they have delusions. If they forgot where they put their wallet or their keys, someone stole them. They create a new reality. So those are the 4 major areas of memory. We'll go. Okay, and then this is a schema, the most busiest slide I think I'm going to show, of human memory. And what I find fascinating about this, what I just learned by researching this talk, is sensory memory is less than 1 second. That's your smells, your vision, your hearing, your touch, your taste. Less than 1 second. It's almost it is an unconscious perception of things around you. Short-term memory, really what you think of working memory, generally is less than 1 minute, at least in the scientific category. There obviously are things between 1 minute and forever, but the working memory, if you decide if you want to keep something, you have about 1 minute to do it. And then long-term memory kind of falls into 2 categories, kind of the conscious long-term memories, and then kind of unconscious, almost instinctive, kind of skills or kind of unconscious things that you don't even realize you can pay attention to anymore. And then explicit is kind of events and experiences that you've had in your life, or kind of facts or concepts, knowledge, like test-based stuff. This is kind of the general paths in a big picture of memory. So what causes memory loss? This is not an exhaustive slide, but I just want to kind of give you 3 big categories. One would be neurodegenerative dementias, Alzheimer's, vascular-related dementia, often it's a mix of Alzheimer's and vascular, Parkinson's, other things like frontotemporal dementias, progressive supranuclear palsy. These are kind of rare dementias, but they're all kind of a primary CNS problem. Then depression, other mental illnesses, OCD, schizophrenia, have real significant impact on different patches of memory. Heavy alcohol use causes an organic memory loss, as well as short-term. Trauma, drugs, and amnesia, so kind of brain injury, either psychological, mental trauma, or physical. Lots of different kinds of drugs have kind of confusion and memory effects, or amnesia. Okay, so let's just briefly talk about the 3 areas. So shortest-term memory is sensory. It's unconscious input from the senses. If it's perceived, you can keep it for about half a second, and then you have to decide, am I going to pay attention to that? and try to transfer it into my working memory, or is it forever, gone forever? So we decide that right now. You're deciding, do I want to listen to this guy? Immediately you decide, okay, I'm going to put that in my working memory, and that goes to the short-term memory bank, which again only will last about up to a minute. 15 seconds is kind of what. Okay. It's really sensitive. All right, short-term memory. If you have paid attention to that sensory input, you then put it into your short-term memory. It's kind of a scratch pad. It can hold from 5 to 9 items. There's obviously outliers with that. Chinese folks tend to, when they study people in China, can retain about 10 on average, whereas English can only retain 7. Does anybody know why that is? Pardon me? More visual? Well, every Chinese word or your descriptor is a single symbol, whereas English have multiple syllables in their words. So Chinese folks on average can remain, because they use visual single symbols for each item or word, they can on average retain 10 as opposed to English and 7. I think one of the reasons the Gettysburg Address was so memorable, as I say here, 261 words were 1 to 2 syllables out of the whole speech, out of 276. So it wasn't so much that it was eloquent and it was Abraham Lincoln, it may be just that he used a lot of short words. And it's partly why we all remember it. We'll memorize it. Well, you can't memorize a long speech. You can't memorize a lot of complicated words. So short words. That short-term memory information goes to the prefrontal cortex temporarily for like 10 to 15 seconds. If you're lucky, it's more than 15 seconds. Think about it. That's how long it takes to translate 1 or 2 sentences. Why do you have to break after 1 or 2 sentences of translation? So they can transfer that into kind of words that they can translate in time before they forget all the sentences you said before. That will disappear unless you make a conscious effort to remember it. So we're going to talk about, how that works. I'm going to count. I'm not going to count out loud. And then I'm going to 10. And you couldn't write it down either. All right, show of hands. How many people remember the number? Good, I'm looking. It looks like about 30 to 40% of you remembered it. Okay. Very good. You're going to get another test right now. Okay. Take a couple seconds. All right, I'm going to count to 10. All right, how many can remember the number? Yeah, so more. So that just gets to how the brain processes chunks of information. And how many didn't remember either number? So okay, a couple people, because there's a silver lining to that. So if you didn't remember, there's a saving grace, and this cartoon says, I'm not losing my memory, I'm just living in the now. And so you can be proud that you're a good Buddhist, and you can just live in the now. You don't have to worry about stupid number tricks like that. All right, so long-term memory. This, in some ways, is the most fascinating thing, which gets to the patience I'm going to talk about. You transfer things to your storage, to your long-term, permanent, more unlimited memory. You attach meaning or association to it. You have strong emotions. You may have to speak it aloud. You tell the story over and over. There's lots of ways that we transfer things to our long-term memory. Or you create chunks of information and use mnemonics. Those are all different reasons why the information gets kind of etched into the longer-term memory. I want to expand this a little bit, and then we're going to talk about the patient experience to 3 kind of general categories. Personal memories are things we remember, your personal experiences. But I think from actually taking care of patients over all these years, there's 2 others that are really valuable. The collective memory, what your spouse remembers, what your family remembers, the family stories. And even if a patient has lost memory, that collective memory still has a real powerful value. Or external memory, what you've written. photos, videos, things that are kind of externalized during the course of your life, which you may not remember anymore. So think about that as we talk about these patients. So a 90-year-old woman who has mixed Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. She has two of the different kind of major types of dementia illness. She has moderate to severe dementia, and she's been bedbound in her basement for 7 years. She hasn't been out of the basement except for a couple trips to the hospital for 7 years. She gets care from her 68-year-old loving daughter, an aide and a grandson. She's disoriented to time and place. She doesn't remember recent or long-term events. She doesn't understand her medical illnesses, and she doesn't know her family's names. But she's eating well. She actually smiles, and whenever her daughter asks her to, she'll blow kisses to her daughter. She has a good sense of humor. Like her daughter and I will joke with her, and immediately she can kind of laugh and actually make a little joke back, but then she doesn't remember that. So what is lost in this patient? My impression is that she lost her recent and long-term memories. She lost her ability to care for herself. She doesn't really have an understanding of her deficits, and sometimes that's a blessing because she doesn't seem tortured or really disturbed by her memory loss. That's her experience right now. And what remains is really quite powerful. Her ability to express affection, receive affection, her humor, her ability to hear and process new information in a very short term. She takes great pleasure in touch and voice and visuals. And the collective memories that the family talk about are still part of her enjoyment, although she herself does not personally remember them. Sorry. This is a more extreme example. This is a harder one. This is a lady who I recently cared for who's 71, has severe brain damage from 2 cardiac arrests, both of which she was resuscitated at home by her daughter successfully, brought to the hospital. She had metastatic breast cancer, recurrent endocarditis, infection of the heart valves, kidney failure. Her eyes are open at home. She's awake, but she's unresponsive to voice or physical stimulus. She's on a tracheostomy and a feeding tube for 5 months. Yet when we visited her at home, and she was a spiritual author. She had 7 books, and she wrote spiritual poems. She's a beloved mom, and her family reads her poems at bedside throughout the day. And her daughters care for her 24/7. So think about, in her, what was lost and what might remain. Okay, so much more profound. She loses verbal interaction. She loses her awareness with others. Although her daughters tell you she is aware, they can sense that she is aware. She doesn't process, retain, or recall information. She can't care for herself. But what is very profound about what does remain is she has a collective family memory. They tell stories that they feel like that she is still sharing because they think she can hear them. There's physical touch between them. There's actually her external memories, her books and her poems, which they read back to her, and they gave a copy to us, and we actually use her poems to figure out how her values and what she would want done for her. And they have time home together. So even with profound memory loss, much remains. So this is a real quick study that kind of talked about, even though you forget, is the emotional value of your contact or emotional value of your experience last. It was like a study, 17 Alzheimer's patients, 17 healthy elders. They showed video clips, 20 minutes of very sad ones, 20 minutes of happy ones. And even though the Alzheimer's patients had virtually no memory of the video, they assessed their mood, and for greater than 30 minutes later, the mood of the patients were much improved with those who watched happy versus sad. So the bottom line is forgotten events continue to exert profound influence on the emotional life. That was their conclusion. So actions can last. There can be an emotional, affective, kind of benefit despite having no memory of the experience. Several of them didn't even remember watching a movie. So the family, though, sadly, can lose intimacy. They can lose a sense of recognition, both of the person that they knew and the patient's recognition of them. It's hard to communicate, and there can be grief while people are still alive for that loss. There are things families do, and this is more in mild to moderate dementia, but you can restructure the environment with reminders and daily routines, memory aids, sharing photos and stories, kind of telling the stories over and over again. daily intellectual and social exercise, and then the daily supports that the patients need, but getting respite care for families so that they can cope with this kind of emotional struggle that happens over years. Oh. So if you're interested in what you can do to prevent memory loss, on the left are the 6 kind of summaries of kind of what the literature says prevents memory loss. So stay in school, so years of education, stay social, do brain and body exercise, high veggie diets, modest or no alcohol, and prevent vascular disease. So you all know how to do most of those things. If you really want it to be have your A game, your A memory game as long as possible, you do the left side. If you don't care as much about keeping your A memory game, you do the things on the right side. Okay. I'm going to close, and I think I'm close to the end of my time. I weave my questions and discussion throughout, so I defer that time back to Dr. Smith. This is the last case. Mr. O'Connor, who's his real name, he's a 77-year-old, had moderate to severe dementia. He's disoriented to time, recent events. He does not recognize his family, and he wanders outside of his home. So as a result, he was moved into an assisted living facility. And he's sad and upset over the change, but he falls for the new girlfriend next door who lives in the assisted living, and now he's very happy. He actually introduced his girlfriend to his visiting wife. So if I presented this to the MI2 small crew, so if you were there, don't give the punchline, but does anyone know what his visiting wife said? So that's what his wife said. Does anyone know, other than the MI2 people I presented, who his wife is? Sandra Day O'Connor. So she's a retired Supreme Court justice who retired to care for her husband. So she left the Supreme Court, probably the best job in the country, to care for him. And this is at a time before he had his new girlfriend, but while he had some dementia. And I guess I would just close by saying no matter what stage of memory loss you are at, the emotions of love and affection will endure. I'm going to stop there.